It is 4:07 on News Radio 610 WTVN. I am Vince Tornado, and it is great to be here. I'm glad to have you along for the ride. The third hour and everything archived. You already got the first 2 hours of the radio show archived online. You can catch them at vincetornado.com. Everything is on there. We archive it on YouTube and have everything set to go on the site. And if you miss any bit of the program, it's all there at vincetornado.com. Very interesting to see the YouTube audience take off and all that good stuff. Elsewhere in the show, in about half hour, we're going to be covering 6 new rules for baseball. Interesting how they are changing some of the game. But right now, I want to focus on the Ebola virus. Now, we know it's going to take a lot to clean up. We know that it is going to be a really touchy and tough cleanup process. But there is a different kind of process that could happen in Texas. We've got the man, Thomas Duncan. Now, Thomas Duncan came to the U.S. He was asked in the Roberts International Airport in Monrovia. He was asked on September 19th, have you come in contact with anybody who has the Ebola virus? He answered no, and that was a lie, because 4 days earlier, he had carried a woman, was with her in a taxi cab. She was pregnant, and she also was infected with the Ebola virus. That man came to the U.S., and is now causing a nation to be on their tippy toes and, in my opinion, be a little bit more freaked out than we need to be. But it is definitely cause for concern and something that we need to take a look at. But about Mr. Duncan, he is currently in increasing critical condition in a Texas hospital, but he could find himself in a courtroom as a result of this. We bring on now Brian Bouffard. He is a legal expert. And Brian, would this be an aggravated assault charge for this Ebola patient, or what would it be?
Well, I mean, if they do anything at all, it would seem like it would need to be aggravated assault. But even Craig Watkins, the Dallas County DA, admitted after he, made that statement that he doesn't even know what they could charge him with.
What do you think?
And I agree. Say again?
What do you think they could charge him, and what could it be? Because here's the deal, man. He's come in contact with, it was 12 to 18, then it was 80, then it was 100-plus people. So you could have potentially 100-plus lawsuits. So this is kind of crazy, man.
Yeah, and I think if we do see anything legal out of this, I do think it will be a civil lawsuit. I don't think it will be a criminal case, because they've got to prove that he, knowing that he had Ebola, took certain actions here in Dallas County or here in some jurisdiction within the United States. And right now, at least based on what I've heard, I don't think that it's clear that he knew that he had been in contact with somebody who had Ebola. That pregnant woman, what I've read is that there's some possibility that it would have been reasonable to think that whatever her medical issues were pregnancy related. So, it all depends on what he knew and what he did at the time. And I think Mr. Watkins was trying to analogize this to some successful prosecutions we've had out here for knowing transmission of HIV. When you know you're infected and you intentionally have unprotected sex with someone, that can be and is an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. But in this case, I don't think that analogy applies, and unfortunately, it looks like Mr. Duncan may not live long enough to be in a courtroom or anywhere else.
Which obviously is something that we all give our sympathies and prayers to the family, because that's all talking points aside and all commentary aside, that is a very sad and tragic situation. That obviously, goes without saying, but sometimes it's good just to say it. Do you think and by the way, we're talking with Brian Bouffard. He's a legal expert. There's a chance that Mr. Thomas Duncan, he is the Ebola patient in Texas. Do you think there's a chance? I mean, how likely do you think it is? In my mind, not very likely. Sadly, I believe this guy is probably going to die in the next week. I don't want to sound callous, but that's just my opinion, kind of my thought, kind of a common sense thing there. So what do you think is the likelihood of him actually facing any kind of charge?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna say 0% chance. I just don't think that there's any way that they can prove what they would need to prove as an aggravated assault to get him. I think now we can play hypotheticals and say, all right, well, now that he knows for sure that he has Ebola, what if he got up somehow and walked out of his out of his hospital room and intentionally came into contact with somebody, well, then you've got a different scenario.
Yeah. Do you, I mean, based on what you know right now, has he done any of that? I mean, is this something that he has engaged in? Because as I see it, this is a guy where, you know, the problem with it, Brian, is that we have a lot of people who are so emotionally hyped up and charged where there is almost an immediacy of trying to get the information out just like that, where accuracy, unfortunately, kind of takes a back seat. So even if we do see something, man, it's going to be weeks down the road if he makes it that long. Oh,
of course, and I think you've hit it on the head, not just for this story, but for kind of the discourse about almost any serious subject in our country today. Is we're so dominated by the emotions of it that we don't take the time to do what we all should do as rational people, and that is step back and tap the brakes and see what the real facts are before we start commenting, you know?
Now, do you know, in your knowledge of the whole legal field, do you know of a person, I mean, have you dealt with personally somebody who has had maybe perhaps an AIDS patient or somebody who has had a communicable disease like this and has been charged? Have you dealt with that personally? How did that shake out?
Yeah, I mean, those cases are not, I mean, I'm not going to say they're common, but they're not terribly rare. I mean, it does happen. And, sometimes those can be, the facts of those cases can be extremely callous. I mean, somebody who knows that they have a deadly disease and intentionally, go out and expose other people to it, I mean, that's pretty clearly an assault, and those cases have oftentimes been successful.
Now we're talking to Brian Bouffard, legal expert, about the potential charges for the Texas Ebola patient. Brian, is there any chance that perhaps the hospital could be charged? Because I know that he was at the Texas Presbyterian Hospital. He was given antibiotics, sent home. There could be some other cultural barriers. I mean, I know that in Liberia, the language primarily is English, so I don't think language would be a barrier. So is there a chance that a hospital could be charged?
You know, I don't think criminally charged, but like I mentioned earlier, I think the possibility of a civil lawsuit against the hospital is very high. Okay. You know, because it sounds like they had enough information to know that it's probably not a real good idea to just send this guy home.
Okay. Now, walk me through, and I'm not a legal expert, you're the guy, and I know that there's probably a couple of things that I do know about it, but give me the difference between a civil lawsuit. Obviously, that, I think, as I understand, that's one with a lot of people kind of involved, like maybe against the manufacturer of a product. And then there's one that is a criminal, and that may be a little bit smaller in scope. Give me the two differences between that, because I think that's important as we look into the charges that could come about as a result of this Ebola story.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's not really based on size.
Okay.
It's just, the typical difference is that in any criminal case, it's the state government or the federal government charging somebody with a crime and trying to put them in prison, let's say. Okay. Got it. An offense that somebody has committed against the criminal laws of the land. A civil lawsuit is basically two parties fighting over money. Okay. It can be as big as Pennzoil versus Texaco was. It can be as small as, we get into a fender bender on the street and you don't want to pay me, and so I file a lawsuit against you. So anytime we're talking about a civil lawsuit, we're talking about money damages. Anytime we're talking about a criminal case, we're talking about potential imprisonment or fines. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. I appreciate that. So we'll see how this pans out, because, I think it's unlikely the guy is going to make it much longer, unfortunately, with the way that Ebola does ravage somebody's body. But Brian Bouffard, legal expert, BouffardLaw.com, BOUFFARD Law.com. Appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. All right, so here's the question I got for you. Should Mr. Thomas Duncan, the first diagnosed case of Ebola here in the U.S., should he face any sort of criminal prosecution? Should anybody knowingly coming into the United States with the Ebola virus, they know they got it, should they face criminal prosecution? 821-WTVN, 1-800-610-WTVN. This is the Vince Tornado Show, back in 4 minutes.
When my dad gets stuck in traffic on the way to school...
Oh, come on already!
Take it from me, you do not want to be there.
Dependable traffic reports every 10 minutes on the 10s, mornings and afternoons. News Radio 610, WTVN.